Hello, we're Nat and Kristen. Welcome to our first ever Minisode, where we challenge ourselves to tackle a Powrsuitors question in 15 minutes. Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Hello. Do you think we can talk for only 15 minutes?
No.
But we're going to try.
It's also our 40th podcast episode.
Yeah.
And my lucky number is 4.
Oh.
That's enough chat for today. On with business.
15 minutes, Nat. The question that has come through is actually someone who is looking to consider a role in a startup. So just to give some context. And this Powrsuiter says, I received an offer that's lower than expected, a salary offer, because they can't meet my desired salary. How could I negotiate additional benefits? Great question.
Yeah, we've got quite a few points for this. So we're going to try and cram them into a minute or so each. First one from me is identify your priorities. And we obviously talk a lot about pay being an important consideration. We should be paid what we're worth. But there's a whole bunch of stuff we need to consider when you come to going for a new job. And that's things like getting experience at a startup might be really interesting. There might be incredible opportunities for advancements. One of the great things about working in a startup is you can get into a really senior role and get that experience really quickly. There could be flexibility. There could be all sorts of stuff. So the first thing is to sort of put pay in with what those other benefits are, because startups tend to not pay as much as banks, for example, and there is probably a reason why you've applied at a startup and not a bank.
Yeah, the momentum is incredible in a startup. And I remember when I was being interviewed for a startup, having to give up a big corporate salary, and we wanted to renovate our basement that year.
Just a quick renovation.
That year. And I was genuinely tossing up what my priority was. Was it a new career move, or was it as boring and mundane as renovating my basement with a growing family? It was kind of a thing. And I remember this CTO at the time saying to me, if you join a startup, he appealed to my status strength as part of Clifton Strengths. He said, you will be able to move the needle and people will know it. If you stay in corporate world, no one will ever know your name. And that triggered that status strength in me. And I thought, that's a priority for me at this point in my career, is to be known for what I do.
Yeah, so I love that. So I think that's the first step, is to just really consider why you're going for the job. There are even a classic friends pro cons list of, because the cons in a startup, as a lot of people are finding at the moment, is there's no fat. If things get into a little bit of a financial pickle, there is no security. However, it is probably the best opportunity you'll ever have to understand every moving part of a business and really understand how organizations function and have those opportunities. So you may find when you actually sit down and write your pros con list that a startup may not actually meet, when you're thinking about all the pros and cons, where you actually want to be, and salary is actually really important to you.
Yeah, and I think you need to go in knowing your bottom line. For me, we had to figure out if we could survive with that new salary. So we needed to know that bottom line. And finally, what if it didn't go your way? Is that salary acceptable to you? Do you feel valued? And what will you do if it doesn't go your way? Will you renegotiate with your current employer? Will you carry on looking? I think just having that clarity before going in is important.
Yes, and I think going back to the question, it's lower than expected because they can't meet my desired salary. I would challenge you to make sure you know that is factual rather than something they've just told you. A good example might be asking them for the pay, the average pay for other people in that role, other salaries. Transparency in startups is a big thing, and you may find that was a line, or you may find that actually everyone's being paid in that way, and that kind of changes things as well, because you're not, and we were huge advocates for obviously getting paid your fair share, not leaving it on the table. So
absolutely.
Okay, best time to negotiate.
Yeah, this is our second point. And the best time is when you're going and getting a new job. This is your time to get what you deserve. We often delay negotiation because we think, oh, we need to prove ourselves first, and we get all this value from learning on the job, and then we're going to ask for a pay rise. No. Before you accept, you have to negotiate your pay because it's the easiest, most appropriate, most accepted time to go back and forth on your salary. So it's so important when you're entering a new position to do it now. It's really difficult to do it later.
I agree. And the best thing to start with is your salary. And it's important to keep in mind the worst thing they can do is say no. You can throw in, and we'll get there, all the other perks that you can negotiate. But when you add up the monetary value of those things, you tend to find that a couple of $1,000s extra, even just that in salary, more than covers the benefit. So every extra $1,000 you can get is probably the most valuable thing. So start with that and see of how much movement they have before you move on to negotiating other perks.
Yes. And the last point in this section, I would just say, not only is this the best time to negotiate, the reason why is because they aren't emotionally involved. They've pegged a salary in their brains. They know what they need for a role. They don't know you. And as they negotiate, it's actually about the bottom line in their business and often their budgets and what their company can do. This isn't about you as a human being. This is meeting their needs with a budget that they have.
They don't know you. They've only done a couple of interviews with you. They're talking about the role here. They're not talking about you. Which takes us to point 3. Do your homework, because that kind of follows on from not being as emotionally involved. And I actually gave this advice to a Powrsuiter yesterday. Take yourself out of the situation and focus on the role. The role has a set of responsibilities and tasks that you need to do that come with the value. And if you removed yourself and looked at that objectively, you can do a bunch of research into what that role is worth. And then you're just happy to be the one who fills it. But you should know how much that role is worth and how much anyone doing that role should be paid. And that is just a little bit of a mind trick to remove this sense of what am I valued at to it's not about you. What is the role valued at?
Yeah. And in addition to that is recognizing how valuable that role is to the organization. And that will dictate the pay and what's the impact this role, if filled well, is going to have on the organization. That generally dictates the pay and generally dictates market rates of a particular role. As part of your homework, it's understanding the value to the organization. I recall a coaching session with someone who was negotiating, actually with a startup, very helpful, and they were being hired for a particular role and were pitching themselves as doing maybe half of the responsibilities on the role. And I said, no, you are so much more than that. Not only are you going to do this role, you're going to make an impact in this role because you have evidence of that in the past. You're going to add to the culture of the company. You recognize your strengths are so much bigger than the responsibilities of this role. So it's a great way to sell yourself. Not only are you going to have an impact in the role, but here are some other areas that you're additive to the organization and their mission.
Absolutely. And I think this goes back to startups specifically, is that there is no room to hide, which has huge benefits. And one of them when it comes to startups is you actually can put a monetary value on your worth quite easily. And I remember having this conversation about designers and engineers even back at Hatch Days and the salaries they were paid. And every decision you could make as, for example, a head designer has the implication of increasing revenue by tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it's quite easy if you're thinking about it from a startup's perspective, which is often revenue-based metrics. What is it that you can bring to the table that makes it worth paying you that salary? And you'll find when you actually stop and think, and I love this as a thought exercise because this is how you should be thinking in startups. What am I going to do to make this company more valuable and to make it more money? And you can speak that language and you'll be speaking it for a while if you're sticking around.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on to, it isn't just about salary. During this time, you can explore non-cash benefits. So just starting with things like, look at the holiday package. Is that something that they'll negotiate and move on? What is important to you? Things like, it's a little bit more restricted in a startup, for example. What would a 4-day work week look like? What would some flexi time look like? So these are all points that you can negotiate.
Well, and
on.
I love that as an example of you can't pay me more, but I'm worth more, so you get less of my time for the same amount. And that is a great solution if they're on a budget. And then you've got a day a week to do some freelancing or have some extra time off or whatever it is. The key there is to make sure you don't end up stretching 4 days into 5 without being paid for them. But that is actually a really powerful move. If they genuinely can't afford you for 5 days, they may be able to afford you for 4 days with that same budget.
And then we were at drinks a while ago with someone who actually goes into every role negotiating a coach. Which is a crucial tool for leadership. So what might negotiating benefits such as professional development, which could encompass a Powrsuit membership, which could encompass a coach. What would that look like? We would love to be part of this negotiation, by the way.
Yes, I love that. And if they have very little budget for that stuff, what is the unofficial professional development you could do? What are the responsibilities that you can take on that strategically impact your career? So it could be, I know a lot of people jump straight to people leadership. I want to do that. But there is a whole bunch of stuff around ownership that is incredible skill building. And we've talked about this before on governance episodes, that if you are ever looking at, for example, moving into a board role, they look for people who have taken ultimate accountability for an area. So what are your opportunities to be able to do that? Startups provide plenty of those opportunities. So really think, if not this stage, if you have to sort of take a sidestep for salary right now, what are the things they can give you that it means in 2 years' time you've had a leapfrog forward?
Well, and that can also mean equity in a startup, otherwise known as employee share ownership plan. And often salary and equity run as a seesaw levers. And as your salary goes up, your equity goes down. So this is a perfect scenario where you could actually say, would you be willing, can we negotiate on the equity? It means that the startup doesn't need to use cash to pay for you right now. They're basically giving you shares in their company, which ultimately will be worth something one day should the startup succeed, and should you be able to sell those once you've been there for a certain amount of time. Now, in a non-private company or a startup, you might have company shares, and they might allocate you shares that are actually tradable at a certain part of time or sellable, and you can then watch those increase in value over time because of all your good work and ultimately sell those. So make sure that you're using that as well as part of your negotiation.
Absolutely. Caveat on that, because we've seen some people do very well out of share schemes and have managed to buy themselves the freedom to maybe leave and start something themselves. However, we've also seen people go blindly into them with this idea of shares equal money, equal, it's a done deal. And startups are never a done deal. So always be careful when you're looking at all of these things to not go in blindly. And again, great practice if you're going into a startup, is practicing that ownership of what is the status of this startup? What is their financial position? And really get ownership and accountability over making sure you are aware of their vision, understand their mission, know where the financials sit, because that will be incredibly valuable for you going forward, and also help you understand how much those shares are, rather than them being this thing that's sold to you that may not be worth as much as they're currently valued at.
Yeah, and it can be tricky to wrap your head around. So this is where you can use the power of your network to start asking questions. You will know someone, even us, who have been in startups before, that can help you. And the final point, as we wrap up, and I can see us nearing the 15 minutes.
Oh no!
Yep, is to practice. So we would definitely recommend, you don't need to go this alone. You can use your peers, you can use your friends to practice beforehand so that you can gain confidence in negotiations and recognize that practice makes perfect. You can go back and forth, you can try new things, you can get feedback. So definitely recommend practice. And the last thing is, we're going to add a poll question in this minisode. Have you negotiated? What did that look like? What did it feel like? Did you negotiate any other benefits other than salary? So if you can just not only give us a follow and 5 stars, but also answer that question for us in our poll.
And is this the time where have we announced yet that we've opened our power sessions for 2024?
Yeah.
2024 open for power sessions in Melbourne, Sydney, Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. And because we now have grown a little bit, we have quite a following and spaces are starting to be filled up well in advance. So we would love to see you at a power session. If you're nervous about turning up alone, join the club. Everyone is, but they are brave and they turn up, and we have the safest environment you can possibly have to step out of your comfort zone.
Thanks everyone. Catch you next time with our normal episode, but we will be coming to you with a mini episode monthly. Catch you later. Bye.
Bye.